Caterpillar once had the kind of highway engine loyalty most manufacturers could only buy in advertisements. Owner-operators wanted the yellow engine under the hood because it pulled hard, lasted long, and carried a reputation built far beyond the truck stop. Then the rule book changed. New Environmental Protection Agency emissions deadlines forced every engine maker to spend heavily on cleaner technology, and Caterpillar had to choose whether the on-highway market was worth the fight. That choice put customer loyalty against engineering cost, regulation, and corporate priorities. Caterpillar did not just walk away from trucks. Its next move would be stranger. For decades, ordering a heavy truck was not just about choosing the badge on the grille. A buyer could walk into a Peterbilt, Kenworth Freightliner or Western Star dealership and specify the engine that would make the truck worth owning. For many of them, that meant Caterpillar. The names became shorthand inside the industry: the 3406, the C15, the C16. These engines were known for low-end torque, long service life, and the kind of rebuildability that mattered when a truck was not a hobby, but the machine paying the mortgage. Heavy haul operators liked how they pulled under punishing loads. Owner operators liked that a properly maintained Caterpillar could run for hundreds of thousands of miles before a major overhaul. Mechanics liked that they understood the hardware, the failure points, and the fixes. That familiarity built trust, one repair bay at a time. The yellow paint under the hood became part of the sales pitch. A used truck with the right Caterpillar engine could command attention because buyers believed they knew what they were getting. It was not only horsepower on a brochure, it was parts availability, shop knowledge, resale value, and confidence that the truck would keep earning. That mattered in a market where downtime could erase profit fast. Drivers built preferences around engines that started in the cold, climbed grades without drama, and survived hard use. Fleets built maintenance routines around power plants their technicians could diagnose without guessing. Caterpillar benefited from something deeper than brand awareness. It had a customer base that trusted the product because the product had already proven itself in their own yards, on their own routes, and under their own loads. But that kind of loyalty was built around an older version of the diesel business. The next fight would not be decided by torque curves or rebuild kits. It would be decided by emissions limits, certification deadlines, and technology Caterpillar could no longer avoid. The pressure arrived through regulation and then through a courtroom. By the late 1990s, the Environmental Protection Agency was tightening limits on nitrogen oxides and particulate matter from heavy-duty diesels. Nitrogen oxides help form smog. Particulates were the soot that made diesel exhaust visible and dangerous to breathe. Regulators wanted both reduced, and the old approach of making engines stronger and cleaner through gradual refinement was no longer enough. Then came a major legal blow. In 1998, the United States government reached consent decrees with several major diesel engine makers, including Caterpillar. Regulators accused the companies of using engine control strategies that behaved differently during emissions testing than they did in real highway operation. The companies did not admit wrongdoing, but the settlement forced massive penalties, new compliance obligations, and accelerated deadlines. That changed the engineering calendar overnight. Standards that might have been handled over a longer product cycle were now locked to hard dates. The first major crunch came around 2002. Then the next wave hit in 2007. By 2010, the industry faced even lower nitrogen oxide limits, forcing engine makers to commit to expensive technologies before every long-term consequence was fully known. The technical problem was brutal because diesel emissions are connected to the way the engine makes power. Lowering nitrogen oxides often means changing combustion temperature and timing. Reducing soot can require more complete burning, higher exhaust heat, filters, or regeneration systems. A fix in one area can hurt fuel economy, add maintenance, increase heat stress, or make the engine harder to service. This pushed truck engines into a new era of sensors, electronic controls, exhaust aftertreatment, cooled exhaust gas recirculation, diesel particulate filters, and eventually selective catalytic reduction. Development budgets exploded because the engine was no longer just a block, turbocharger, fuel system, and cooling package. It had become an emission system with a truck attached to it. For Caterpillar, the question was no longer whether regulation could be ignored. It was whether the company would follow the path other engine makers were taking, or bet that its own technical answer could preserve performance, reliability, and customer trust under rules that left very little room for error. Caterpillar's answer was called ACERT, short for Advanced Combustion Emissions Reduction Technology. It was not a single part bolted onto an engine. It was a strategy built around controlling the burn inside the cylinder as precisely as possible, then supporting that burn with better air management, electronic controls, fuel injection, and later exhaust after treatment. The core idea was to reduce emissions without simply copying the path many competitors were taking. In the early 2000s, cooled exhaust gas recirculation was becoming a major tool for cutting nitrogen oxides. It worked by routing some exhaust back into the intake, lowering combustion temperatures. That helped emissions, but many truck owners worried about what it meant for durability. More soot in the intake, more heat to manage, more cooling demand, and possible fuel economy penalties were not small concerns in long-haul trucking. Caterpillar saw an opening. If it could meet the rules while avoiding or minimizing cooled exhaust gas recirculation, it could tell customers that its engines preserved the traits they already valued: strong pulling power, fuel efficiency, and long service life. ACERT became that promise. It used multiple turbochargers on some engines, advanced fuel delivery, refined combustion timing, and increasingly sophisticated electronics to shape how air and fuel move through the engine. For fleets and owner-operators, that message mattered. Buying a truck engine was not just about horsepower on a brochure. It was about uptime, repair bills, resale value, and whether the engine could run hard for hundreds of thousands of miles. Caterpillar had built a reputation in that world, and ACERT was designed to defend it under new emissions rules. But the counterattack came at a cost. ACERT engines were more complicated than the mechanical and early electronic engines customers remembered. Development spending rose, calibration became more demanding, and every new emission step forced more engineering changes. The company was no longer refining one engine platform in a stable market. It was fighting a moving target set by regulation, lawsuits, competitors, and customer expectations. ACERT kept Caterpillar in the highway engine business longer than it might have otherwise remained. It also showed how expensive it had become to be different. The question was whether a brilliant engineering workaround could still make business sense when the next emissions deadline demanded even more hardware, more testing, and more risk. By the late 2000s, emissions compliance was no longer just an engineering problem. It had become a capital allocation problem. Every new standard meant Caterpillar had to spend before it could sell. Engines needed redesigned hardware, new calibrations, longer durability testing, updated factory tooling, revised service manuals, technician training, dealer support systems, parts inventory, and warranty reserves for problems that might not appear until trucks had worked for years. Suppliers had to be lined up for sensors, controls, filters, valves, turbochargers, and exhaust components that were themselves becoming more complex. That was manageable when the prize was large and stable. The highway truck engine market was neither. Truck buying moved in cycles, often swinging with freight rates, fuel prices, interest rates, and pre-buy behavior before new regulations. A fleet might rush to buy older engines before a deadline, then stop ordering for months. That made it harder to recover development costs on a predictable schedule. Caterpillar also had to compare this business against the rest of the company. It was not a truck engine company with a few side businesses. It sold construction machinery, mining equipment, marine engines, industrial engines, power generation systems, locomotives, and off-highway powertrains. Many of those markets rewarded Caterpillar's deep strengths: heavy equipment integration, global parts support, long machine life, and customers who bought complete systems rather than choosing an engine separately. Highway trucks were different. Caterpillar supplied the engine, but truck makers controlled the vehicle, the cooling package, the electrical architecture, and the final customer relationship. Meeting emissions rules required coordination across companies, yet the profit pool was shared and the blame for failures often landed on the engine badge. Then came the 2010 standards. The industry was moving toward expensive after-treatment, especially selective catalytic reduction, or toward even more aggressive exhaust gas recirculation strategies. Either path meant more hardware on the truck, more software, more sensors, more validation, and more warranty exposure. Caterpillar could keep fighting. The real question was whether it should. Each deadline demanded another round of spending in a market that did not offer Caterpillar the same strategic control or returns as its core businesses. Compliance had become a trap. The company could prove it belonged, but only by tying up capital that might earn more elsewhere. That logic set up the decision that shocked loyal customers. Caterpillar was approaching the point where staying on the highway no longer looked like strength. It looked like bad math. Caterpillar made the call in 2008. It would not develop a complete new line of North American on-highway truck engines for the 2010 emissions rules. The company would keep supporting engines already in service, and it still had other diesel businesses, but the era of ordering a new highway tractor with a Cat engine was coming to an end. For truck buyers, this was more than a product change. Caterpillar had been one of the last great independent choices in heavy trucks. Fleet could buy a Peterbilt, Kenworth, Freightliner, International, or Western Star, and still choose the yellow engine under the hood. That choice mattered to owners who trusted Cat torque, Cat parts support, and the resale value that came with the badge. The reaction was especially sharp among owner-operators and small fleets. Many had built their loyalty through the 346, the 340C, the 340E, the C15, and the C16. They knew which engines pulled hard, which ones could be rebuilt, and which shops could keep them working. To them, Caterpillar leaving the highway market felt like losing a familiar partner, not just a supplier. Truck manufacturers felt the change in a different way. For decades, offering Caterpillar engines helped them sell to customers who did not want to be locked into a single engine brand. Once Cat stepped away, the market tilted further toward integrated powertrains, where the truck maker controlled more of the engine, transmission, electronics, and service network. Inside Caterpillar, the decision fit a larger strategy. The company could spend billions chasing highway emissions compliance, or it could put that engineering talent into machines where Caterpillar owned the whole system. In construction, mining, power generation, and industrial equipment, the engine was not a standalone component. It was part of a machine Caterpillar designed, sold, financed, serviced, and supported through its own dealer network. That meant more control, more margin, and fewer compromises with outside truck builders. Caterpillar was not admitting it could not build a compliant engine. It was deciding that building one for other companies' trucks no longer made enough business sense. The twist was that Caterpillar was not finished with trucks. If selling engines to truck makers no longer fit the strategy, the next move was to sell the truck itself, with Caterpillar's name on the grille. Caterpillar's return came through a partner that already knew how to build trucks. In 2009, Caterpillar and Navistar announced a deal to develop Cat-branded vocational trucks, with Navistar handling much of the truck manufacturing and Caterpillar bringing its dealer network, customer relationships, and nameplate. The first major result was the Cat CT 660, introduced for demanding work like construction, concrete, refuse, logging, and heavy haul support. Later, Caterpillar added models such as the CT 680 and CT 681, aimed at customers who wanted a longer hood, a more traditional vocational layout, and a truck that looked more at home beside excavators, loaders, and dozers on a job site. This was not a return to the old engine business. Caterpillar was no longer trying to be the engine option inside someone else's highway tractor. The company was trying to sell the entire work truck to customers who already bought Caterpillar machines, financed through Caterpillar channels, and depended on Caterpillar dealers for uptime. On paper, the logic was strong. A contractor who trusted yellow iron might listen when the same dealer offered a dump truck, mixer chassis, or heavy service truck with a Cat badge. Caterpillar understood vocational buyers, and those buyers cared more about durability, parts availability, and job site support than chrome and sleeper comfort. But the truck business had its own rules. Truck customers expected deep on-highway service coverage, familiar powertrain choices, and dealers who understood trucking as a primary business, not an add-on to equipment sales. The Cat trucks also relied on Navistar's truck platform and powertrain decisions at a time when Navistar was fighting its own emissions and engine problems. So the gamble carried a built-in tension. Caterpillar had the brand, the dealers and the vocational customer base, but it did not fully control the truck ecosystem the way it controlled a bulldozer or an excavator. For Cat loyalists, the badge on the grille looked like a comeback. In reality, it was a very different kind of bet, and it would prove much harder to turn into a permanent return. Caterpillar did not leave the highway because drivers stopped respecting its engines. It left because emissions compliance changed the return on capital and the risk no longer fit the reward. That is the industrial lesson. Even iconic machines disappear when the market stops paying for them. Thanks for watching. Comment below with the engine story you want next, and subscribe to Industrial Empires for more documentaries on the rivalries,